Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Hillsborough Township Planning Board meeting of October 12th, 2023. Please join me in a salute to the flag. Please be advised this meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, otherwise known as Sunshine Law. The notice of the 2023 annual meeting schedule and amended meeting dates have been provided to the officially designated newspapers, to the township clerk, and available here, or on the township's website, and also available here, the Hillsborough Township Municipal Complex. In addition, application documents have been made available on the Township Civic Clerk website, and complete applications are available in the Planning and Zoning Department for inspection in accordance with the public meeting notice. And with that, may I have a roll call of board members and also board and township professionals, please?
Vice Chair Julian, Mr. Wagner, and Mr. Delcor are absent. Mr. Peason? Here. Mr. Scobo? Here. Ms. Smith? Here. Mr. Radowitz? Here. Committeeman Chigarelli? Here. Mayor Lapani? Here. Chair Sirachi?
Here.
Mr. Coyce?
Here.
Mr. Bernstein?
Here.
Mr. Mayhew?
Here.
And myself and the videographer are here.
Okay, thank you. First up, we have consideration of meeting minutes. First up is the meeting minutes of February 2nd of 2023. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay. we have
The eligible members, Mr. Chairman, are the mayor, Mr. Peason, yourself, Mr. Radowitz, and Ms. Smith.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion from the dais?
I have Ron on there, too.
Who?
Ron Scobo.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Scobo as well, sorry.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Scobo?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Radowitz?
Yes.
Mayor Lapani?
Yes.
Chair Sirachi?
Yes. Next, may I have a motion to approve the March 2nd, 2023 meeting minutes? Not all at once?
So moved.
Excellent. All right, the mayor seconded. Any discussion from the dais?
The ineligible members are Mr. Peason and the committeeman.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Scobo? Yes. Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Radowitz?
Yes.
Mayor Lapani?
Yes.
Chair Sirachi?
Yes. Okay, we're going to have resolutions for consideration, no planning board business, and no ordinance for consideration. So with that, we will move to business from the floor for matters not on this evening's agenda. If anyone would like to comment on anything other than this evening's agenda, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, we're moving on to tonight's public hearing, which I think everybody is here for that, is Western Road LLC with a file number of 22-PB-03-MSPV with a time of decision of October 31st of this year. This is Block 185, Lot 1, Weston Road.
Mr. Chairman, before we get introductions of council, I have received 2 certifications by absent board member, examination of record eligibility to vote, both from Mr. Radowitz. He has viewed the transcript and the recordings of meetings he missed. He is therefore eligible tonight to participate.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And I'll just remind board members, is when we speak, we'll just bring the mics down. We don't have a lot of range, because I see a lot of them up in the air right now. So, before we get anyone saying, I can't hear you. So with that, Mr. Ogrodnik.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board. My name is Mike Ogrodnik. I'm an attorney at Savoshock Law Firm in Somerville, New Jersey. I'm here on behalf of the applicant Weston Road, LLC. This is the 9th night of public hearings on this application, which was first filed February 15th, 2022. At the last hearing, if you recall, we had testimony from our environmental consultant, Tom Offenard. You also heard our planning testimony from Keenan Hughes. There's a discussion at the prior meeting with Mr. Bernstein regarding making available additional witnesses to testify under oath to allow the board to cross-examine the witnesses. And to that end, we've retained two additional engineers. Our first engineer is Jack Zabura. He's our professional acoustic engineer to place his expert testimony on the record and related to his report and his analysis that he provided. So I don't expect too much testimony from Mr. Zabura. We then have Glenn Bardner, who we've retained as an air quality expert, also an engineer, to provide testimony related to his air quality impact analysis report, which has been uploaded to Civic Clerk. And then lastly, we have Michael Ford to basically go over three things. Number one, comments from FAA related to some certain improvements we need to, given the proximity to the Central Jersey Regional Airport, to review results from the additional geotechnical testing and to go over the final tweaks to the site plan relative to those and prior comments from the board professionals and objectors. So unless there's any legal issues, I would ask that Michael swear in our witnesses and present Jack Zabura as our acoustical engineer.
All right, first I'm going to let the objectors, counsel, introduce themselves.
Jordan Ash from Danzig, representing the
Yeah.
Jordan Ash from Record Danzig.
It's green. I don't have a connection.
Test 1, 2, 3.
All right, that one's working. All right, Jordan Ash from Riker Danzig, representing the objector, the Hearthstone at Hillsborough Homeowners Association. Co-counsel Michael Sinkovich from Lieberman, Blecker, and Sinkovich, representing the same party.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Lombardozzi swears anyone in, for the purpose of the record, over the last roughly less than 24 hours, my office, as the board as well, has received two letters, one from Mr. Sinkovich and one from Mr. Ogrodnik. I am happy to tell you I have not had a chance to review either one of them, and therefore I do not intend to opine nor to advise the board accordingly. At some point in time during the process of this application, prior to conclusion, I will probably opine on both letters, but for purposes of moving this application forward, it can move forward without any further differences from where we were before.
Thank you.
Okay. You swear me in first?
Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And for the record, can you spell your name, please?
Sure. It's Jack Zabura, Zybura.
Thank you.
I'm an acoustical engineer with the firm of Lewis Goodfriend and Associates in Chester, New Jersey. I'm a professional engineer in New Jersey in good standing. I'm also board certified by the Institute of Noise Control Engineers. I'm currently certified by Rutgers as a noise control officer. And I've been working for Goodfriend and Associates for about 14 years now. I had been before Hillsborough before, but not since 2017, I believe.
Any objections? Okay, hearing none, we accept.
Thank you.
Let's continue.
So we were retained by the applicant to review potential noise impacts from the proposed warehouse. And let's start with what the codes are. So NJDEP has a statewide noise regulation, and the regulation is enforced at receiving properties. And so for residential receivers, those limits are 65 decibels during the daytime hours and 50 decibels during nighttime hours. Hillsborough also has a set of noise standards, and they mimic the state code. So it's the same level, 65 daytime, 50 nighttime. So for purposes of our analysis, it's essentially the same code. Hillsborough has other aspects of the code that apply to other things like music and whatnot, but for a warehouse, it's essentially the same code, same standard to look at. When we do projects like this, we've done many warehouses over the years, and we have a collection of data of typical warehouse operations: trucks moving, backup alarms, loading operations, trash compactors, typical HVAC units for the roof. And what we do is we get the drawings from the engineer and the topography drawings for the proposed grade, and we construct a 3D computer model of the site. And then we place all these various operations where they should be. Trucks are in the loading areas, on the truck driving aisles, rooftop equipment on the roof, trash compactors at either end of the loading areas. And we input our source data for sound levels of these various items, and then the computer model calculates the resulting sound level at various points of impact. For this project, we had 2 points of impact up at Hearthstone, and then also one over at 61 Weston Road. And these represent the 3 closest residential receivers to the site, all basically to the northwest of where our site is. And this is all detailed in our letter dated 30 August 2023. In order to meet the daytime code, we found that all the operations were already compliant. So the rooftop equipment, trucking operations, backup alarms, as is, without any further modifications for noise control, they meet the daytime regulations at the residential property lines. For nighttime, however, there are certain operations that would exceed, and those included backup alarms and trucks entering and exiting the property. So once a truck is on a public road, it's exempt from the noise code, but as soon as all tires are on your property, it becomes part of the site and part of the operation. So to address those issues, we spoke with the applicant, and they've agreed that they would limit some of their operations during nighttime hours. So they will not have any trucks entering or exiting the property during nighttime hours, and they'll also eliminate backup alarms in the loading areas, or if feasible, convert to low noise backup alarms. If they have control of all of their trucks that are moving there on the site, there are low noise alarms that basically sense how loud the surrounding environment is and only emit a certain level above that. So they're much quieter than your standard, blaringly loud backup alarms. And
Just
those are really
for-
the, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to, just for clarification, just to define what are night hours.
Yeah, so for the noise code, it's 10 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Okay, thank you.
And so during those hours, the applicants agreed to limit those truck movements, as I said, and either eliminate or reduce the actual output of the backup alarms on the site. And by doing those 2 things, that now brings us in compliance with the nighttime regulations at those residential properties as well. And that's the proposal we have in front of you today. That's how they're going to address and meet the noise code.
Thank you.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Mayhew, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the first question I have is you just mentioned lowering the sound level of a backup signal. Who needs to approve that? Isn't that some sort of OSHA code?
Yeah, so OSHA has many things that are qualifying as backup signals. So you could go to a strobe, you could have flag people. But what I'm addressing here is they make backup alarms that just emit a steady signal, right? There's no adjustment of that level. That's what most trucks have. There are options, though, where there's backup alarms that will sense how loud the existing environment is and then only emit a tone slightly above that level. So in essence, it's a lower output of sound that's loud enough for safety reasons, but not, the maximum level that a standard alarm would have. And how that would work is they would identify trucks that would be working on their site at night and physically swap out the actual alarm on the truck. So for example, they could have a yard truck that just stays in the loading area and just moves trailers around at night. And they could equip that truck with a low noise backup alarm to address that issue. Or simply have them, cut it out entirely and have some other forms of backup, either a strobe or something of that nature.
How did you quantify, you mentioned the applicant is going to limit the evening activity. So how do you quantify limiting the activity in order to drop the level from 55 down to 46?
Yeah, so the point of impact is really when the truck is near the entrance going off onto the road. So essentially, they're just going to not permit trucks to enter or exit the site during nighttime hours. All the truck operations, if any, will be down towards the docks. And so that additional distance gives us the additional attenuation we need to meet the nighttime code. So you're limiting the location of the trucks essentially on the site.
Did I hear you correctly, then you would prohibit entry of trucks after a certain time?
Yeah, entry and exit at nighttime hours, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Unless, 10 years from now, if we're all having electric trucks, that could change, because now you have a much lower noise truck. But we're not quite there yet, so as long as we have these diesel trucks, that'll have to be the solution.
In calculating your sound levels, does the amount of truck activity on site impact the sound levels that you would anticipate?
Yeah, so in our model, we have, our full-blown daytime model has 14 trucks operating on site, and we always model trucks to be driving, so accelerating, because that's going to be the worst, as opposed to idling or, you know, rolling or anything like that. So we have 14 accelerating trucks in the model, which I think is pretty conservative. Usually warehouses like this, you know, they have a lot of docks, but all the trucks aren't, you know, lining up to get in and out. They'll have, you know, a handful operating on the site at any given time. And for nighttime, we essentially just took out the trucks of that model that were near the road, and we're down to, I think it was 6 trucks in the loading areas only that could be driving around at night. And you can see we're a little bit below, you know, our loudest point is 46, so we do have buffer to the code. You know, if another truck goes on, it's not gonna push us over.
On the last page of your report, you have a graph of ambient sound levels. And it appears the ambient level increases around 21, or close to 2,100 hours. I guess that would be around 8:30 or so. Can you explain to me how the ambient noise is increasing based on your graph from like 8:30 at night till 2 or 3 in the morning? It's still higher than, say, from 11 to 7.
Yes, you'll notice these ambients were taken in August, so I can say with pretty good certainty that that's insect noise. So the insects are just constantly going at night, and then, you know, they die off during the day. Not die off, but they stop making noise during the day.
I think you might have already answered this. So if there was an increased truck activity on site, you would expect the sound levels to increase?
Yeah, slightly. So if you already have, say, 6 trucks and you add a 7th, these levels might go up by half a decibel, the way that the decibel addition works. So it's a logarithmic scale. It's not, you know, a linear scale.
So that would
Basically, every doubling of sources increases by 3. So if we went from 6 to 12, that would be a 3 decibel increase. And even that, we could accommodate. We're at 46 right now, so it would, you know, potentially go up to 49, even if we doubled the amount that I have in my model currently for night.
And I would assume that would occur during the daytime as well, you're saying?
Correct, yeah. So if we went from 14 to 28, again, that's another 3. Now we're only at 58, which is still below our 65 decibel limit.
So increase in truck traffic from 14 to 28 would, in your opinion, would only add 3 decibels
Correct.
to the,
To the overall
Site.
level, yep.
if there was some sort of physical barrier along the loading dock closest to Weston Road, would that help decrease the sound levels experienced on Weston and beyond?
Yes, I believe we spoke with the architect, and the applicant has agreed to put in an 8-foot-tall barrier, basically following the ramp, the loading ramp that's at the northmost portion of that loading area. And I did update the model this morning with that barrier in there, and it does help for some receivers. So once you get to, if you'll refer back to my report and my figure, we have 3 locations. And if you look at location 3 and location 2, that barrier does help those locations on the order of about a 5 decibel reduction. Location 1 isn't really affected because the sound's not really blocked by that barrier. It's going, you know, it doesn't block line of sight.
The barrier you're speaking of, you said would be 8 foot high?
8 foot tall, and it runs the length of the ramp on the north side of the loading area. And the applicant has agreed to put that in. But my original table in my report does not account for that barrier, and we could expect levels approximately 5 decibels quieter at some locations due to that barrier.
Mr. Chairman, that's all the questions I have at this time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Coyce?
The 8-foot barrier, is it currently shown on the plan, or is that something that's come
I had
up
to
since your
I
report?
had to defer to the architect, I believe, or possibly the engineer. I believe it's on the architectural plans, though.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Board members?
So, obviously, there's nothing built there right now, right? So, are you extrapolating the data based on a building and the trucks at a certain distance in a clear environment, or with existing engineering that's proposed on the plan as the buffer of the sound?
So we build the site based on what's on the plan. So any topography changes, this wall that we're now talking about, that's all in the plan, and that's all in our model, and it does account for that. It accounts for reflections off of our own warehouse in certain directions, and also the shielding of our warehouse. For example, to the west, we're going to have a lot of good shielding there because of the building that's in the way of the loading docks. Our source data, however, is all up close data. So when we took those, we were like 12 feet away from a truck going by. So we have a clear line of sight to that source. It's not attenuated by anything as our input data. And the model provides the attenuation of the various proposed elements.
Right, so to be clear, the data is a model, it's not actual, that you're proposing with the building being built, the wall up, the trees, the buffer and everything, what that sound's going to be, because there's actually no data yet because there's nothing there.
Yeah, we can't measure the site that's not there, correct. Yeah.
Is there some sort of document that the engineering industry uses that is the standard for this type of, or software? How is that
Yeah, so it's a
generated?
3D modeling software. It's called SoundPlan. It uses a ISO standard to do the calculations, standard 9613-2. But it's a pretty common and long-standing standard for that type of calculation.
Mr. May, are you familiar with that software and that? What he's
I am not, but I am not an acoustical engineer.
Is that something that's registered or regulated by the state or by DEP or anybody?
So the DEP really only cares about compliance measurements. So the code in itself is really an enforcement code. And, we often use it as, trying to show compliance in planning stages, but it's really an enforcement code. So DEP's real intention is you would go out there post-construction and you could take a measurement and see if it meets the code or not, which the applicant is willing to agree to as a condition of approval, a post-installation measurement to show that we meet
That's
code.
where kind of
Yep.
I was working that way. Okay, that's all I got right now.
Yep, no, thank you. Any other board members at this time?
I have a question about the, looking at the figure for the locations, figure 1.
Yes.
Can you explain what the measurement location means, which would be A?
That's just where we set up our ambient meter when we were out. So we set up a meter out there to get the 24-hour baseline, sound that's in the area from traffic, insects,
Okay,
and
so
everything else.
that's-
That's just
that's
where that
you-
position was, yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure what that meant.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the numbers are where the model is predicting the sound. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, on your figure 2, I don't see a legend, but what's L10, LEQ, and L90 mean?
Sure. So those are different statistics of sound levels. LEQ is more or less an average. It's a time-weighted average of the sound level in that half-hour period. L10 and L90, if you think of a bell curve, it's kind of the opposite. So the L10 is going to be your 90th percentile, so the higher end of that bell curve, higher levels, and the L90 is going to be the 10th percentile of the bell curve, so the lower levels. So L10 is kind of like your continuous steady noise that's always there. L90 and L10 would be like a transient sound, like the traffic going by on the road, something like that. So we like to give a range of here's the average and here's kind of the upper and lower ends of typical sound levels on site.
Okay. Gonna let Counselor for the objectors.
Sure. Mr. Zaburia, right?
Zabora, yeah.
Zabora, apologize. I'm Jordan Nash, represent the objectors. I'm going to try to get through this quick, but I do have some questions. A lot of them are clarifications I'm trying to understand. I'm not an acoustical engineer, obviously. My first question, though, is what was your directive from your client in producing this report?
Basically, we have a warehouse, tell us how loud it's going to be. So we don't really have a lot of direct contact with the client until after we've done our modeling, aside from here's the engineer, here's their plans, and please produce a study for us. And we'll
Okay.
discuss the options for noise control, which in this case ended up being the hours of restricted operations.
Okay. When you're discussing the site layout and report, it's very brief. It's just that it will include one warehouse building. When conducting your analysis, did you have an understanding of the site layout any more specifically than that?
Yeah, I mean, we have the plans which show where the docks are, how many docks there are, the drive aisles that are meant for employee vehicles versus trucks. And we have the full set of plans when we do our modeling, as well as topography plans, so we can see the changes in grade that are proposed. And then we also use Google Earth to import topography from surrounding areas that are beyond our site.
Sure. And the regulations, they apply from a residential property line, that's correct?
It's at or within the receiving property line, in this case residential. So when we do look at our results, we look at the property line, and we also look at the upper story windows of the structures. And so the results in our table are the worst case of those points, whether it be the windows or the property lines. Usually it's a property line because it's closer to the source.
Okay, so when I'm looking at your figure 1 here, the numbers, I mean, I could tell it's sort of roughly drawn, but is it your testimony that you're measuring from the property line and also from a different location?
Correct. So we're measuring at those facades and then the closest property line point to those facades, essentially.
And while we have figure 2 in front of us, when you're doing this ambient noise location, you only did the ambient noise at that A spot, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so no ambient noise was taken at the other measurement spots?
No, it's really just meant to be representative. I mean, it's a comparable distance from the road, which is going to be one of the major noise sources, and insect and aircraft noise is going to be comparable throughout as well. And the New Jersey code doesn't consider the ambient sound as part of what's enforceable. It's only your site sound. So this is really just to show a comparison of what's out there now versus what the code limit is and what our expected levels are going to be.
So, okay, so help me out. When you're measuring the site sound, is it, and I might be showing my ignorance here, that's okay, is it not cumulative? Like, you have your baseline sound, and then if you get a truck on top of that, it might be a louder sound than if it was a truck by itself. Is that not how it works?
It is, but what happens is you take a measurement with that truck and without the truck, and you essentially subtract the two with decibel math, and that gives you the truck contribution, and then that is what is enforceable. And not just the truck, but the entire site. And if you can't get the site to be quote-unquote off, you're permitted to go down the road to a point where you don't hear your site anymore, but the ambient sound is consistent. It's the same road, and that's how you would get an ambient measurement to subtract from your warehouse measurement.
Okay, and that's how the regulations say that you should do it?
Yes.
Okay. Your ambient sound here, that little A, I don't have a color one in front of me, I think it's a red spot. It looks like it's taken sort of in the wooded area, is that correct?
Yeah, we went back from the road. We don't want to be right against the road because we wanted to show, if you're against the road, the ambient sound's going to be higher. So we wanted to try to go back a little bit, kind of matching where the location of number 3's house is. So we're that far back from the road, that's where people would generally be.
So does the ambient sound measurement then take into account the ambient sound once that wooded area is cleared?
No, it's today's ambient sound out there.
So the ambient sound is today, and then that gets put into the model?
No, the model has nothing to do with the ambient sound. That's just a representation for everybody to see how loud is it out there now in this general area of Hillsborough.
Okay. All right, and then help me to understand another point. On page 2 of your report here, there's a table talks about octave band center frequency.
Yes.
Can you help me to understand what that table means and what you're trying to tell us there?
Sure. So the 65 and 50 decibels are the overall level. The codes, both state and Hillsborough, have individual frequency levels. And if you want to think of a piano, right, each key is a different note and it's a different frequency, okay? So these are just giving different limits for different points on that scale of frequencies. So low end has a higher limit than middle of the piano and then higher of the piano. We also look at that in our model too. For ease of discussion, I didn't mention that, but we do meet those codes as well, the octave band codes.
So what because some of the nighttime limits for the higher end octave center frequencies are lower than 50.
That's correct.
And we don't have those on this site, is that what we're to understand?
No, we do, but so those only apply for continuous, truly continuous sound, like the rooftop equipment. A truck going by would not be held to an octoband standard like this, because it has to be basically a steady state sound.
Okay.
We do have some sources that are continuous like that, and we do meet both the daytime and nighttime octoband regulations as proposed.
Okay, and since you brought it up, another one of the me trying to understand things questions I have is continuous sound versus impulsive sound. I know what those words mean on their face. Help me understand a little bit what they mean in
Basically,
this
the difference
context.
is 1 second, so if it lasts for a second or less, it's considered an impulsive sound. And in our case, if you have a trailer getting attached to the truck, you get that little bang sound when the two meet, that's impulsive.
So-
Basically, anything over a second is considered continuous, and then if it's steady continuous, that's when the octobands kick in. So like a truck going by would be a continuous sound, but it doesn't occur long enough for it to be a steady octoband regulated sound.
Okay, so a truck backup signal, that beep is longer than 1
It
second.
is, yeah. Yeah, that's been brought up many a times. I also sit on the New Jersey Noise Control Council, which is an advisory board to the DEP regarding
Sure.
this code, and that's been asked and answered. It is a continuous noise.
What about those low noise backup signals? Are those also
Yeah, it's
longer than
basically
1
the
second?
same type of sound, it's just a lower volume.
Okay. And you have something here called loading activities, impulsive sound. What type of loading activities are you talking
Yeah,
about?
so when we measured our loading activities, we realized the loudest things that happen are when people might have a forklift and they, accidentally bang into the side of a truck or something like that. And those are all impulsive sounds, and that's what's in our model. Those pallet jacks or, material hitting each other as they're loading or unloading the truck.
Okay, and I noticed one thing that to me is conspicuously not in this list is brake noises. Are those continuous or are those impulsive sounds?
So generally continuous. It's a burst, but then it usually lasts longer, right? So there's an initial burst, but it continues past the 1 second.
And are brake noises included in your model?
Yeah, they're in the model too. They're usually about the same level as the backup alarms, so same issue with those.
Okay. You also spoke about typical warehouse operations. You recall
Yeah.
that testimony? How are typical warehouse operations determined?
We've studied many warehouses, and these are sources that we've measured on sites and how they operate. So all these things that are on our list here, those are all the typical things we see at a warehouse.
Okay, how then do you account for the specificities of a particular site plan?
We have to make an engineering judgment. We know that you're not going to have 50 trucks all operating at once. You're going to have a handful of them all operating at once. You're not going to have 50 backup alarms going off at once. You'll have 1 or 2. That's just the way these things operate. So you have to just make an engineering judgment as to how many trucks may or may not be operating at any given time.
Okay, so I'm hearing you right that those inputs are based on a person's judgment. As an engineer, but
Yeah.
a person,
Yes.
not the model. Okay. So how would that impact, using this case as an example, where you have whatever your typical warehouse operations might be, but now you have a location with 28 truck parking spaces and 20 loading docks? That may be more than typical. How does the model account for that?
I don't think it's more than typical. This is actually a smaller scale warehouse than we've done in the past. I think our model inputs are accurate to what this site will be expected.
So
to
you think
produce.
your typical warehouse operations are 28 spaces and 20 loading docks?
At any given time. You have to remember that the code is at a point in time, not a total during the day or over a certain period. It's at any given time what's operating on the site.
No, I'm not asking you about the trucks operating on the site right now. I'm asking you about the docks and the spaces, basically the opportunities for trucks to be on the site. So, there's way more than is needed in the code here.
Well, I can't comment on that.
Right.
We're just here to look at the noise.
But you can comment on what's typical. So I'm just trying to figure out where we are
I'm
on
saying
that.
typical from a noise standpoint of how many trucks are operating at any given time. My understanding of, an operations expert could probably testify more, but generally not all the spaces are filled at once, but you might have trucks parked there staged, but not operating, and that's
What
why they need that many spaces.
What percentage of spaces are typically used on a site?
I'd have to defer to an operations expert for that.
Was that input into your model?
We took, typically what we see as being operated is, for this size site would be 6 trucks in the loading areas and then another 8 or so traveling around the site as a worst case.
What's that 6 truck, what's that based on?
It's just based on spacing of the trucks and how they'd be able to operate with each other.
And that's, are you relying on the operations expert for that?
Now, we're using our own judgment.
Is it, are you the person that made that judgment in this model?
Yes.
Okay. So your typical warehouse operations on a site like this is you're going to have 6 trucks operating at once?
That's my testimony. Could have.
Well, we could have 20.
Could have less.
We could have 20 or 28, right?
I don't know. Not at one time, I think that would be excessive.
All right. So you talked about the proposed nighttime operations, including no backup signals or low noise backup signals,
Yes.
correct? All right. Is this something that the applicant has control over?
They've agreed to it, and if they can't meet that, they'll have to find out some other, administrative way to control that, or it's really education of the drivers as to how to operate their vehicles.
What about drivers that aren't employed by them?
They'll have to have training before they go on site, I suppose. That's really an operational question.
Is that a reasonable thing that the applicant's going to be able to do here?
They've agreed that they could do that here, yes.
Okay. Are all trucks currently equipped with these low noise backup signals?
No, they would have to be equipped with them if that's the route they go.
So now we're agreeing to get specially equipped trucks with specially trained drivers that are going to come onto this
I
site.
can't speak to how they're going to accomplish it. That's a method that they can use to do that. They could just have one truck that remains on site, and that's the truck they use to move trailers around. And they can equip that truck with a low-noise backup alarm and use it to move trailers around and load up and get ready for the next day. That's
So
an option.
Is your testimony that the applicant's agreeing to have only one truck on the site
No,
at
but
night?
that is a way they could do it.
But that's not their current operating procedure, that's not what they're agreeing to.
They're just agreeing to limit the hours of entry and exit and to limit the backup alarms during nighttime hours.
All right, you talked about your modeling, correct? And what was that modeling software called?
Sound plan.
Sound plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't see any reference to sound plan or description of the model in your report, is that correct?
That may be correct, yes.
Okay, so how is the public, my client, this board, supposed to know and be able to evaluate whether or not the sound plan modeling system is a reliable one if we weren't told of its existence prior to your testimony?
It's a standard program. We could also have done it in Excel. I mean, that's just a tool that we use. It's a tool to trade.
Are you aware that as an expert giving expert testimony, one of the things that you're being asked to do is to explain the methodology behind the conclusions that have been reached?
And here we are tonight, yes.
But you didn't do that in your report, did you? So now we're all playing catch-up, is that correct?
I don't believe that's true. We could have presented this report tonight as an exhibit, but we gave it to the board ahead of time. Any questions or comments could have been relayed back to us, and we could have addressed them ahead of the hearing.
Well, as a point of fact, I don't think you could have. You had to submit it 10 days in advance.
We did.
But you just said you didn't have to, so I'm just making the point of
We
fact
did.
there. But what I'm getting at here is I want to ask you questions about the SAM plan. I want to be able to determine whether or not that is a reliable source in the industry. That's something that engineers rely on. I've never heard of it. Mr. Mayhew's never heard of it. I can't speak for anybody else who hasn't spoken here tonight. But how are we supposed to make that evaluation?
Well, due respect, you're not a professional in the field. The acoustical industry, that's a common program.
So I shouldn't have the opportunity to do some research and ask you some questions?
You can. We're saying it's not some program that we, cooked up in-house. It's a standard commercial program that you can purchase, and that's what we use for these models. We've been using it for over 15 years.
All right, so getting into the model a little bit, what is in your report is that you consider the propagation of sound over distance. What's not in your report is what distance. I'll ask you tonight, what distance?
All distances. It's a modeling program, so it takes the sound from the point of the source across the site to every distance across that site.
So it's just generally all distances is what you're telling me?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you have the plans, you can measure how far away certain things are from the warehouse, but we just import the plans, and those distances are incorporated into the model.
But you import the plans, there is some level of person input that gets us to the end result, that's correct?
There has to be, yes.
Okay. And to be sure, the levels here in your Table 2 under results and discussions, I think Mayor Lapani did mention it before, they're not actually measured noise levels, correct?
That's correct, they can't be.
Okay. So, and just to sort of be sure, what we're being asked to rely on tonight is data of not actual measured noises and a model that no one's heard of before. You brought it up tonight, other than you in this room. So is that what we're being asked to rely on?
You're being asked to rely on a standard program and input levels that we have measured at other warehouses, input to this model, to propagate the sound on the proposed site. Keep in mind, the code is an enforcement code. We're just showing this is how we're going to get there. And as I stated before, the applicant has agreed to a post-installation measurement to prove that we meet the code. And that's really where the proof is. It's the compliance measurement after it's built. And quite frankly, they have to meet. It's a DEP code. There's no relief that can be granted from it.
Understood, but if this board's going to approve this project, they want to know that it's at least more likely than not that it's going to meet it.
And that's what this report shows. This is how we're going to meet it.
All right, I don't have any more questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. May I have a motion to open to public?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. If there's anyone from the public that would like to question this witness on the testimony he just gave this evening, please come up to the mic, state your name and address for the record.
And that you are not affiliated with the objectors, and state that on the record, please, as well.
Good evening, Brian Tarantino, Fairfield Lane, not associated with the objectors. Mr. Zabora?
Yes, sir.
So I heard the discussion around the model itself. Did you document the model assumptions that you used?
Yeah, those are in our report. So we have taken into effect the effect of topography, the effect of air absorption, the effect of topography in buildings and shielding.
So would the presence or absence of foliage have an impact on the model?
Yeah, so we actually don't model foliage in our modeling because it changes throughout the year, right? So in the wintertime, you're not going to really have much foliage attenuation. And even in the summer, you really have to have a thick, dense forest before you really get noticeable reductions. So we never account for the foliage in our models.
And that assumption is documented in your report?
I believe it is not in our report,
Okay.
but we do not have it in our model.
And then how about temperature? Does a colder temperature transmit sound better? Is that the case?
Yeah, so the model, the ISO standard actually says that you need to consider nighttime refraction because sound travels differently at night, and it's a worst-case result at night. So the model considers nighttime refraction and also considers the temperature during night and colder temperatures, which is also a worst-case scenario.
So what temperature did you assume?
I believe it was 15 degrees Celsius.
Okay, what's that in Fahrenheit? 15 is
Around 50s.
50. So does the sound get transmitted more easily? You know, you're the acoustical engineer. Does the sound get transmitted more easily below 50 degrees, like say at 40 degrees?
Not to the point where you're looking at, integer changes in our results here. We're talking about fractions of decibels that changes from temperature.
My question was, does sound transmit more easily at a lower temperature, lower than 50 degrees
At a
Fahrenheit?
minute level, yes.
In a minute level?
Yes.
Okay, did you quantify that? Did you quantify the...
Fractions of a decibel.
So did you quantify that in your report?
No.
Okay. Is there an assumption documented in your report that specifies the temperature that you used?
No, other than that we're using that ISO standard that I mentioned. That's what's documented in there.
The ISO standard is documented in your report?
Not in the report, but that's what the model uses.
So the model that you didn't mention and the ISO standard that you didn't mention documents it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so not documented, in other words?
In our report, no.
Okay. So how many truck trips did you assume when you did your model?
We're not doing, it's not an average over a day, it's instantaneous on the site at any given time. So we assume 14 for the day and 6 at night. And the 6 at night are in the loading areas only.
And how did you come up with those numbers?
Engineering judgment.
Okay.
I believe I discussed this with the attorney.
Do you know that the applicant has an operations expert?
We could believe I have not met the man, but
Okay, his name is James Scott, by the way. Did you speak to Mr. Scott?
I did not.
So did you get any input on the operations of of this particular warehouse, the planned operations of this particular warehouse, from the applicant's operations expert?
No, sir.
So you used your judgment based on typical warehouses,
Yeah, the
but not
size of the
this,
property, yeah.
but not this one?
Yeah, typical, yes.
Okay, and why didn't you talk to the operations expert?
We just didn't, as we just didn't. That's what we've been doing for all these warehouses. We have our typical data, and that's what we've been using all these years.
Okay. So maybe the analysis you did is perhaps not as applicable to this particular warehouse based on the particular operations of this warehouse. Is that possibly true?
I think our analysis is a good representation of what we can expect here.
What we can expect at a typical warehouse, but not this one.
I would say this is a typical warehouse. There's no unique.
On what basis are you saying this is a typical warehouse? You said that a few times, I'm just not sure.
From an acoustical aspect, the type of sources on the site.
So type of sources are typical, but it's more about the operations of the facility, is that not the case?
Well, if
The
they-
operations, like a high operation facility would produce more sound than a low operation facility?
Well, if they had certain equipment that was unique, then we would want to consider that. But this is a typical warehouse from our understanding. And as I said, even if we doubled the amount of trucks in our model, we would still be below the code.
Okay. I want to understand just a few more questions, guys. I understand that you were measuring nighttime noise levels over 50 decibels, is that right?
As the ambient sound, yes.
Okay. Now, you talked about the mitigations would be a low noise backup signal.
That's an option, yes.
Okay, and that low noise would be take into consideration the ambient noise, and if the ambient noise was low, it would be able to broadcast at a lower sound level. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, is that going to happen at nighttime, or like how would that happen at nighttime? Since at night the sound level is very high due to the insects.
Well, I would imagine there wouldn't be as much insect noise anymore because there'll be a loading dock there, not trees. So the ambient will drop actually in the loading area, and it senses the area around the backup alarm, not the area at the house or anything.
Okay, so, but what about, I mean, there's lots of, it's a forested area, right? I mean, there.
Currently it is, yeah.
Okay. Great. So let me understand, so you're saying that trucks that come onto the facility, someone would be there to swap out the backup alarm to a low noise backup alarm? Is that how that would
It
work?
would depend on the actual end user, if that's how they want to do it, or they might have a fleet of trucks that they can control.
Okay, well, just by the way, the operations expert said that's not going to be the case. They're not going to have a fleet of trucks that they're going to control, just to by the way. So you're saying that in order to meet the sound level as per your report, the applicant is committing to having someone at the property line swapping out the backup signals for every truck that comes onto the facility.
I'm going to object to the form of that question. It mischaracterizes the testimony.
Okay?
We're talking about nighttime operations.
Yeah, I'm talking about the operation of low noise backup signals, and the testimony is that the trucks are going to be swapped out the regular backup signals with the low noise ones.
Again, we object to the form of that question. It's mischaracterizing the testimony.
Okay, what did I miss?
If you have another question, you can ask Mr. Zabura.
So are you telling me that in order to meet the sound levels that you have projected in this report, which are in compliance, that the applicant would have to ensure that any truck that comes on the facility would have to have a backup alarm swapped out with a low noise backup.
No, it would only be trucks that they want to operate at night in the loading area. So this, for example, this could be a truck that, or they call them yard jockeys. It's basically just a truck that stays on the site and can move trailers around. And that would be something that just remains on the site, and they could swap out that alarm, and that's what they use at night. And no other trucks are used at night. That's an option.
And you confirmed,
Or they
well,
could just simply have no nighttime operations at all, but we didn't want to limit them that hard because they can do some things at night and still meet code. They can have trucks staged and they can load them and have no truck movements.
so just by the way, the applicant testified that they would have a single truck, what did you say, it was a mule truck or?
Yard jockey or
Yard
something
jockey. So you're saying that they're going to be limiting their truck movements to one at a time, is what you're saying?
That could be, if that's how they want to do it, that could be an option. Or they could have multiple yard jockeys that are all fitted out with these alarms.
And what's the recourse that neighbors would have if, in fact, the noise is louder than louder than the noise ordinance?
Yeah, so fortunately in New Jersey, we have a good process for that. So the DEP, as I said, has a statewide regulation. If someone wants to file a noise complaint, it would go to the county health department. The county would come out, take a measurement, and see if it meets code or not. Hillsborough also has their own code, so you might be able to also call the Hillsborough, police or health officer, whoever handles it for Hillsborough, and they could do the same thing, come out and take a measurement.
I just have one other question. You were saying that you are looking at the delta, right? You said, here's the ambient, and here's the ambient plus the trucks.
I have not said that, no.
Okay, I'm sorry. Help me. What you said something about you take one level
Yeah,
with
so
the trucks and one
So
without.
the ambient is subtracted out from what they call the total sound level. So you would have a total sound level including trucks and other warehouse operations. Then you have your ambient level without those operations, which could be taken either at the same location if they were able to get the warehouse, off, if you will, or they can go down the street and get a representative ambient somewhere else. You subtract those two numbers, and the resulting level is that due to the warehouse, and that is the number that is enforced by the code.
Okay, so in that situation, it's possible that the actual sound level that the residents, that the neighbors would be hearing would exceed the decibel limits, right? The 50 and 65.
The ambient already does exceed in some cases.
Okay, so you're saying that you're not actually ensuring that the operation of the facility is going to be below those sound levels. Is that what
We're
you're?
ensuring the operation facility will be below the code limits. You obviously have no control over the ambient. The ambient is what it is.
Okay, but the additional sound might put it over those limits.
No, because they're not added together. They're evaluated independently, the warehouse sound and the ambient sound. And there's the warehouse sound in it of itself that is code compliant.
Right. I understand that. I guess I'll just try one more time with the question. The result, the total sound, somebody sitting on their porch is not going to be just one or the other. It's not just going to be ambient or the warehouse. It's going to be both together. Isn't that true?
True. So let's pretend that our warehouse was creating a level of 50, which is louder than what we're predicting here. But let's just say it's 50 right at the code limit by itself. And if your ambient is also 50, those two will add to 53.
Okay, so
a 3
it'll,
decibel increase in terms of what you might hear. But
right, so
then-
that will exceed the nighttime limit.
Well, no, because the limit is for the warehouse only, which is 50, and that is compliant.
Okay.
So it
but
doesn't exceed the limit, but I will say it exceeds 50, yes.
Okay, so they would be experiencing a sound that's louder than what the code says is an okay sound.
Which they already do.
Yeah.
The ambient's already over
Okay.
that level.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to provide some clarification. Hillsborough Township does not have its own measuring tools for sound. It relies solely on the county.
Okay, yeah, many towns have agreements with the county to facilitate that. Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a clarification? I think the public might be asking questions about the swapping out of the backup signal on trucks. But to help clarify, earlier I think you mentioned that there wouldn't be trucks entering in the
Correct, this
evening.
is only in the
So-
loading area. And obviously, the backup alarms only occur in the loading area. No one's backing up, as they're coming into the site.
So from 10 on, there's no trucks entering, and then therefore there wouldn't have to be a swapping, because I think maybe some of the public thinks the truck's coming in, and then you need to quickly switch some
Yeah,
gear.
no, this would all be done in the, if that were to happen, it would occur in the dock area, I would presume.
But it's not happening because you're
They're not
saying
coming
that
in,
the
yeah.
applicant's saying there will be no trucks entering
These are
after
basically
10.
trucks that they have designated to remain on site and operate at night.
So he's only moving trucks that are already there
Yeah.
from the daytime.
Correct.
All right, I'm just going to ask a point of clarification. Say the truck makes it in at 9:59. It's going to be moving around on site, or will it have to stop?
Well, it's really, the code exceedance really happens right at the point of entry. So, and then at that point, you're moving, further away, and that sound level's dropping as it's moving away. So once you get back from that entry road, you're below the code.
So it's possible to have a truck. I'm not talking about the jockey mule or whatever we want to call it, but if a truck
If the truck wants to sneak
could
in
be
at
moving around in the
9:59, I
back
think
on
that's
its-
fine, yeah.
And
Yeah,
how
and trucks can move around in the loading area at night. That's not a problem. The only problem is when they're coming, off of the road.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, Chairman, possibly maybe the trucks need to be limited before 9:59 in that case. But I wanted to follow up on another question about code enforcement. If a county or someone came and tried to enforce the sound level, they would have to know what the ambient sound was, wouldn't they, in order to determine if the current operation is exceeding allowable?
Yeah, so there's 3 methods that DEP provides to get an ambient measurement once your source is already there. One is to turn everything off, which may or may not be feasible. The second is to go what they call behind a barrier. So you might go on the other side of the house where now the house is shielding that warehouse noise, but the ambient's still relatively the same because you have insect noise and aircraft and everything else. And the third option is to walk away from your first measurement point, down the road or what have you, to a point where you can't hear the warehouse, but now you only have the same ambient sounds. And all 3 of those methods are acceptable. That's what the police officers are taught as to how to enforce the code and determine your ambient sound level.
Thank you.
Hey, guys. Elaine Welsh, Orchard Drive. I'm not associated with anyone, any other plaintiffs or anybody. I have a question about shift change. Have you been at a warehouse when the employees are doing shift change to hear the noise?
I have, but I'll mention that employee vehicles are not regulated by the state because they're not considered part of the operation of the facility. Only the trucks are. So employee vehicles are not part of our model. They're not enforceable.
All right, but so if the personal vehicles are not part of the standard, what about the actual noise from the staff as they are leaving? Have you ever personally heard
Yeah,
that?
those are also, human voice is also exempt. So none of the employee vehicles or employees themselves are enforceable, and they're not part of our study.
So, but my question was, have you been to
Yeah,
a
I've-
warehouse
I've-
where the
I've-
shift
I've
change
seen that,
at
yes.
night and seen the exuberance of people getting out of work and seeing other workers that they haven't associated with while they were working, and knowing the noise level from the folks who are exiting the building or entering the
I mean,
building?
I've never measured it. I don't know what the level is. I've seen it occasionally if I'm doing warehouse measurement and I'm there during a shift change, but again, it's not part of the state standards, and I have no idea what the level might be from that.
That's a concern of mine.
Thank you.
Grant Culmer, 144 Taylor. Very quick question. I am not affiliated with anybody. Is that what you're looking for?
Yep.
Thank you so much. Sorry. When does impulsive sounds become continuous?
After 1 second. 1 second's the criteria.
And then if there's a bunch of 1 seconds, let's say 5 minutes apart, I got a truck backing up, I bang, and then 5 minutes later, bang, and then does that take into account the model?
So in the daytime code, you can have as many impacts as you like, and the code's 80 decibels during the day for impacts. At nighttime, however, if you have more than 4 of those in an hour, that 80 decibel limit drops down to 50, same as the continuous sound.
Okay, so
That's what we're evaluating against. It's impact sounds at night meeting that 50 decibel standard.
so no more than 50 decibel impact sounds
Basically, you
per
can,
night.
you can have
Did I get that right?
basically, you can have 4 that are 79, right? And then if you add the fifth, that fifth has to be 49. Has to be
Oh.
below 50.
Okay, so you can have 4
In an
80
hour.
limit and then 50 within
Not
an
any
hour.
limit, but 4 that hits that, the 80 decibel limit.
Okay, thank you. Forgive me if you're not the person as well, but the agreement to have trucks not enter or exit during the nighttime hours, is that in perpetuity for this property or warehouse if approved?
I would say that it would not be in perpetuity because trucks can change. I think I mentioned earlier, if they go to all-electric trucks in the future, I mean, those will certainly be quieter and can probably meet the nighttime code.
I guess the question is it per it's not per applicant, but it's per owner or per?
I don't know that it would live with the site or live with the property. I don't know.
It probably would be a condition.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
with all due respect to the witness, he can't speak on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Ogrodnik, for purposes of the record, is your client agreeing as a condition of a potential approval that there will be no trucks entering or exiting the site between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., and that they will be fully responsible for failure to comply?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other members of the public who are not affiliated with the objectors would like to comment or question the witness? Okay. So motion to close? Not yet?
You've got other witnesses,
No,
so
it's
I might as
open.
well leave it open for I believe Mr. Ogrodnik has at least 2 other witnesses
Okay.
he plans on having testify, so you might as well leave the public portion open.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate
Thank
it. Our next witness is Glenn Bardner from Bodner Engineering. Yeah, why don't you? Mr. Bodner, could you please?
I do. Glenn Bodner, B-O-D-N-A-R, Bodner Engineering.
Mr. Bodner, could you provide the board with your professional experiences, your licenses, and how long you've been practicing in this field?
I graduated from Ohio State with a dual degree in environmental engineering and civil engineering. Been a licensed New Jersey professional engineer since 2001 and founded my own firm that same year.
We would offer Mr. Bodner as an expert in the area of air quality impact analysis.
Okay, any objections from the board? Okay, hearing none, we accept. You may proceed.
I was asked to assess the local air quality impact of truck traffic due to the proposed warehouse. Air quality is directly proportional to the miles driven. So the premier software is the EPA's own MOVES 3 program. In fact, they just came out with the MOVES 4 in September, which actually reduced emission rates due to new vehicles being more efficient than older ones. My report was based on the MOVES 3 version, so it actually slightly overstates emissions. But the overall impact for the truck traffic proposed, I based it on 17 truck trips per day. And the minimal impact is, for most of the tailpipe emissions, it's less than a pound per day per, less than 1 pound per day per pollutant. The highest emitting pollutant was nitrous oxide, and we still, at a peak total emissions of 17 trucks per day, it was less than 1 pound per day. So it's a minimal impact for the area, for the truck traffic. Some of the bases I used We're 5 miles per day per truck. I mean, any further than 5 miles is certainly not local. And using the EPA zone program. It was pretty straightforward, to be honest.
Could you just go through your table and how the normal total truck emissions relate to what you're projecting in your modeling as well as what is the standards?
Well, in this area, I mean, there's certainly a lot of, we talked about it with noise, the ambient noise. The vehicle traffic in this area, and I show that in a report from some DOT traffic count stations, just Route 206 alone averages about 35,000 vehicles per day. So the idea was 17 trucks at a peak would impact the overall air quality only negligible amount. The EPA Moves 3 program, basically it takes diesel trucks and creates an emission factor for each pollutant based on fuel use, which is based on mileage. So the input factor is the miles driven per truck. As I said, it was pretty straightforward. I mean, it's the number of trucks and the miles driven per truck. That's the input data.
Is it your testimony that the improvement of this property with the warehouse on Weston Road would not exceed any levels that are regulated?
Correct. It has a negligible impact on the overall vehicle traffic and therefore the air quality.
What are some types of uses that are regulated by way of emissions?
What type of property uses?
Yeah. Factories, paint booths, things like that.
Oh, okay. Other industries. Yeah, I mean, I deal with coating industries, industrial bakeries, wastewater treatment plants. Their air impact is significant in many places, and their off-site issues really come into account. Most of them need control equipment on the roof to limit emissions to a safe level, and that's where DEP sets their emission limits, based on off-site issues.
For a warehouse, you wouldn't anticipate any regulated air quality point source?
I'm just going to make an objection. I know we're not really in court here, but we're really leading the witness a lot here. It's a direct testimony.
The only point sources for the warehouse would be fuel combustion sources, boilers, heaters, rooftop units. Mobile sources are not considered by DEP for the site, for their permitting purposes. It's just point sources, stationary sources.
I have no further questions for the witness.
Mr. Mayhew, any?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you measure the ambient air quality at this site?
We didn't measure the air quality, no.
You talk about emissions from, say, Route 206. How far does emissions travel to a point where a recipient would notice the emissions?
They dissipate pretty quickly. The surrounding, your air quality is very local. That's why these trucks moving off-site, out of town, that's why we only considered the 5 mile as local, which is even stretching it a bit. Any further than that, it's certainly not going to remain local.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are the residents along Western Road experiencing an impact from the vehicle traffic along 206?
Well, I don't want to speak for DOT, but New Jersey air quality is an issue, as everyone has heard about ground level ozone. Mobile sources are the major source of that.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we determine the impact of emissions from this site if we haven't figured out the current air quality surrounding the site?
Monitoring can be done, but that doesn't, the idea of the report was to calculate what the increase would be from the warehouse, which is the 17 trucks or, 5. I think we actually, normal was more around 5 trucks a day, but a peak of 17 to 20. That was the only purpose of the report. What ambient is, it's kind of not related to the increase.
You mentioned the report it's on page 2, has a table of emissions from the MOVES 3 software, and you quote pounds per day for 5 trucks and for 17. Is it arithmetic in the sense that if there was 34 trucks per day, would it simply be double the number you show for 17?
Yeah, it's directly proportional, yep.
You talked about other types of uses where you sometimes, I guess you've done site-specific emissions study.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I understand you might have mentioned that that's for stationary sources.
Correct.
But could something like that be prepared, considering that trucks are moving around the site, loading and unloading? They're not stationary, but they're stationary in the sense that they're staying on that site. Would it be possible to do an emission study for a site-specific source under that condition?
Sure, I think it would follow the same methodology. I mean, the EPA program uses grams per mile. So if you had an estimate for your miles around the site, your driven miles, it would follow the same methodology.
And does the DEP limit, and you mentioned on your report 6 different emissions, when you do a site-specific study, are these the 6 pollutants that are studied, or are there additional ones, or?
These are this is the MOVES program, which is related to traffic. That's their traffic program. For a stationary source, you'd have different pollutants if it's a bakery, if it's a printer, coder operation, a lot more solvents, and bakeries give off ethanol. So that would be your primary subject. These 6 listed pollutants are traffic-based, as tire wear, brake wear, not normal for industrial situations.
Sounds like they're from a combustion engine, essentially.
The first 4 are from combustion. Then the other 2 you notice are some particulates. PM 2.5 is the small particulates, and that's from brake wear and tire wear. You can imagine a little wear and tear that comes out in the air.
Have you worked on any sites where these combustible pollutants are measured?
Oh yeah, yes, all the time.
And does the DEP limit
Yes.
these levels from say, a combustion?
Right, well, to give you an idea, the small level of emissions from these trucks, what's considered a major facility in New Jersey and federally for, say, NOx is 25 tons per year. So if you can emit up to 25 tons per year of NOx and still not be considered a major facility. So that's the type of levels of a industrial site in New Jersey.
Would the impact of the site be different depending on the area that you're positioning this? So if this site was in the middle of Wyoming, let's just say, and you had residents across the site, would they be experiencing a different level of impact than if this was outside the Holland Tunnel and proposed?
Because of background emissions or because of topography or?
Because of the background.
It's cumulative. Air quality is cumulative.
So then that would go back to, wouldn't it be important to know the current background level?
Yes, and there are various monitoring stations around the state. That wasn't part of this report. It wasn't requested. Your county sources are a great source for that as well, county health department. But this report just was about the proposed increase in emissions.
Would it be possible to take some measurements on the background ambient quality of air at the site?
Sure. It can be taken, or it might be publicly available already. There are monitoring stations around the state. I don't know this particular area, but
You wouldn't know how far away
yeah, I could look it up.
But you could also do a test on the site?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have right now, Mr. Chairman.
Michael, how you doing? You need a timeout yet? You do? Okay. All right, so we're going to take a pause right now. What is I want to use the big clock there. We'll just assume it's 8:25, so we'll take a 10-minute recess and restart. I know, but I just want to. Okay. I know. But I will say 8:35 on that clock, we will reconvene. Okay, we're back in session. And I think we just left off with our engineer's question, so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Coyce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just have a couple of questions. Would the layout of the development, does that have any impact on emissions?
The layout of the warehouse, you mean, itself?
So if the warehouse wasn't just one warehouse, or if it was multiple buildings or anything like that, does that play any factor in terms of the impact of emissions?
It does, not at these levels of low emissions, but the topography, if you will, of the roof does matter. You'll get downdrafts or updrafts. So when they model emissions, a lot like it sounded like the noise modeling goes, you put in all the heights of stacks, surrounding buildings, prevailing winds, things like that, and the program would model downstream emissions. But that's not this case because this is mobile emissions, not stack emissions.
Okay, thank you. And then also in your report, you indicated that, let me see here. So you indicated that in close proximity to several county and interstate highways. How do you define, or what in your opinion do you think the site is close to or in close proximity to interstate?
Not as much for air quality purposes as just to show that was more of a traffic, mass traffic comparison. Like here's a few local streets and the highways to compare to the 17 or 20 trucks a day we're talking about on Weston. Nearby, it was just it's not a specific term, it's more of a generic term, but your nearby highways have far greater traffic, even Millstone Road and Union Avenue and places like that nearby. It just as a comparison of traffic, mass traffic numbers.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, thank you. Board members?
Two questions. Obviously, first one, and it wasn't brought up, but I would say 206 is probably the closest impactful road to this area. And the prevailing winds are west to east, which would bring that emissions into the development in question, which Mr. Hay had asked what the existing conditions are. But more importantly, the data you gave us of the less than a pound per day, what number would you consider if that came in to be an impactful number? Where we said this is something that would have to be looked at closer.
Right, well, that was sort of the comparison I was trying to make to some major facilities. Nearby Klein is the wastewater treatment plant in Bridgewater, the New Jersey American plant. Their NOx emissions, I guess it's public, so they're over 70 tons per year. So I mean, that's the scale of fuel combustion numbers that just one site alone can produce. That's why these numbers are, as an overall air quality statement, are negligible compared to the local current air quality.
So I understand. So you would say that 70 tons is an impactful number.
That would be that we had to do further
what
studies
number
of.
do you consider, what range, are we talking 20 tons, 5 tons? What do you think is considered an impactful number that?
In New Jersey, there's an annual report. Almost, it's like doing your taxes only for air emissions. You do it every year. Most major facilities have to submit it. You look back at the previous year, actual production and fuel use, and calculate your emissions. That report is only required of facilities who have over 25 tons per year of nitrous oxide or 10 tons per year of VOCs, which is solvents and alcohols and things like that. So that, I think, is the best way. Like, the state of New Jersey is uninterested in facilities smaller than those levels. And we're talking 10 and 25 tons per year. So these numbers, I
was just trying to get understanding
what
the range is and where you were considering it impactful compared to these numbers.
Right,
to
impactful is
understand.
pretty high, yes.
Now, the traffic that drives the road now, was there any indication of what those provide as opposed to, so again, the normal, delta?
I didn't study the current emissions. Okay. Same as I didn't, there was no cause to check the current. It was just the proposed increase. But again, it's proportional to what we have here based on 17 trucks. I mean, if I took, I don't know if Weston Avenue has a traffic monitor, but these are ones I pulled that happen to have traffic stations to do traffic counts. If I had Weston Avenue data, cars per day, trucks per day, it's easy to calculate.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bodnar, in looking at your table, everything is calculated based upon miles. Is idling of the trucks not calculated into the equation?
I didn't consider on-site. There are idling regulations. I know we have the school bus idling regulations. Again, it would be, if we consider, it can be calculated based on the grams per mile, around, like we talked about doing calculations for on-site emissions if you drive around the plant 5 or 10 miles per day. Idling was not considered because it wasn't a parameter I was given, but it can easily be calculated. I can provide that.
You can provide that?
Yes.
Okay. And second, you talked about the emissions dissipating. Is there an equation to calculate the distance that it would take to dissipate to go to a true negligible number?
Modeling can be done. I mean, there's computer models that they are based actually on fluid flow. But the levels of initial emissions, these are tailpipe emission calculations. The levels are so low that there's almost no modeling to be done. I mean, you're less than a pound per day
But if you,
of a particular contaminant,
but if you
but it can be done.
perhaps go back and add back in the idling calculation, maybe those other calculations are necessary.
I understand, yeah, I would suggest, rather than doing the modeling, which can be, well, it's already been costly, but calculate on-site idling plus mobile emissions.
Fair
If
enough.
it's still a negligible number, then further modeling doesn't seem necessary.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Bodnar, thank you. Idling was one of the questions I had, so we're on the same wavelength there. And my follow-up to that was, what if there were more than one vehicle on site at the same time? Is there any contributing factor from that?
Well, it is cumulative. So if there's, two idling vehicles as opposed to one, it's double the emissions. So it's that's straightforward, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, but did you just say that you did not consider the site when you responded to the first question about idling?
I didn't consider on-site idling emissions, no.
Okay.
To be honest, the emission calculations were so low, and the truck traffic was so low, 17 trucks a day, that further study didn't seem warranted.
And I guess there's this mule that we always hear about, or jockey, or whatever name it takes for the site. Again, I don't know if that has an emissions contribution as well, but it might be something to consider. So, does the study include automobiles?
It does not. They're again, like for noise, DEP doesn't regulate. The facility is not regulated for personal vehicles.
So it's not part of
It's not part of this study, no.
Okay, and maybe for our benefit, can you explain one more time what you mean by how does 5 miles driven apply to that site? Because you kept saying that, it's 5 miles is what we applied. I don't know if that means a truck on site, 5 miles is the max, or if it's 5 miles in either direction?
Right. I mean, the idea was that the Weston Avenue corridor, the local emissions, the theory was more than 5 miles, it's not local anymore. The emissions are further away. If, a truck's traveling 100 miles, Hillsborough is not going to feel the effects of all 100 miles. They would only, if it's a local assessment, we should only consider the local emissions.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have. Thank you.
So I'm just going to because I think the expectation for this was the overall impact to air quality that this project in its totality have, and I think the commitment was already made mention about even the cars. I mean, I understand DEP doesn't regulate or anything, but I think the expectation, we want to know what the overall impact to air quality was, including all those factors. I'm going to go turn it over to Counselor.
Sure. Hello, Mr. Bodnar. Again, I'm Jordan Nash. I represent the objector here. I have hopefully just a few questions. Off the bat, what I'm trying to understand is, I know you said just now you're measuring the local area of 5 miles to and from the site, but it seems like you're also comparing it to the air quality as it affects Hillsborough as a whole. Can you sort of talk me through that a little bit, how it applies to your analysis?
Well, I use 5 miles as a as a local parameter. Once a truck leaves a 5-mile radius, I don't consider it local anymore. It's mostly, I don't know the exact layout of Hillsborough, but if that's out of town, after 5 miles, it's not local anymore, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for.
Well, we're talking about the effects of, 206, 202, and 287 on Hillsborough and these large numbers, and of emissions coming from those roadways.
Well, yeah, I'm not implying that they are contributing to the statewide emissions. Those highways, as are all highways in New Jersey and all the roads, all the cars. But as far as this assessment, air quality assessment, I'm not saying these are contributing in particular to the area. This was more to show the mass traffic numbers of what a small number is being added by this warehouse compared to some of your local roads. That was not to imply emissions.
When you say the small numbers added to this warehouse, are you saying the small numbers added to this warehouse to that 5-mile Weston Road area, to Hillsborough as a whole, to, where are we focusing on?
I'm focusing on the warehouse and its neighbors. That's the air quality from tailpipe emissions are going to be local, or then they dissipate. The further from the warehouse, the vehicle effects of the warehouse aren't felt. They're either getting on a highway or they only leave from one point. So there's all 17 truck trips only occur at the warehouse. Once they leave the immediate street or two, the effects aren't felt from all the trucks.
Okay, so when you have in your report terms like near zero factor and negligible local increased emissions, when you're using terms like that specifically, are you referring to the emissions from these trucks in that 5-mile radius on Hillsborough?
Yeah, yes. These calculations were all done on that 5-mile trip, that local trip, if you will, of 5 miles. Beyond that, these calculations would increase because there's more miles, right, but those other miles are elsewhere.
So is it your testimony then that where we have, for example, exhaust NOx, I'm looking at your chart on page 2 of your report, at 17 trucks a day, 0.7812 pounds a day. Are you looking at your report with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I read that number right, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is it your testimony that that amount is near zero and negligible as it impacts the immediate area at Weston Road?
I do. I agree that maybe some background monitoring should be done, but as New Jersey's air quality goes, that is a negligible amount.
I'll carry off Mayor Lapani's question a little bit, specific to the Weston Road area, not for New Jersey as a whole, because I know that's how those major air sources are calculated.
Gotcha.
Is there a number of pounds per day that would be beyond near zero or negligible?
Well, New Jersey requires, as an example, for VOCs, which is HC, hydrocarbons, they require emission control when it reaches a level of 3.5 pounds per hour. If you have a piece of equipment that puts out 3.5 pounds per hour of solvents, ethanol, alcohols, you have to have some type of stack control on it. And that's per hour, 3.5 pounds per hour. So I think, that is my standard for significant. If that's what the state considers significant, I have to agree.
Okay, you also spoke about the not having specific traffic data for Weston Road, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, did you review Mr. Dolan's report in this matter? Mr. Dean, I'm sorry.
I did not.
You did not?
Did he? No.
So if there was specific data on traffic counts there, perhaps we could use that to get to some of these ambient numbers?
We could, yes.
But before now, we chose not to look at that source, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, in your report, at the bottom of page 1, you discuss what you call an important concept. And I'm not going to read the quote, I'll sort of paraphrase for you. The distinction between emissions and exposure. You're familiar with that, I assume, seeing as you wrote it?
Yes.
All right. Would you agree that emissions create a risk of exposure?
They do.
All right, and that's why we try to limit harmful emissions and not simply tell people to stay away from emitting sources, correct?
Correct.
All right, so that statement, would you agree it's sort of irrelevant to this analysis?
Well, no, not because these are tailpipe emissions. So all these calculations are at the tailpipe. Because they're emitted doesn't mean that you're exposed. So that's the difference. There is a pretty big difference between emissions and exposure. I mean, if you're several feet away, you have less chance of encountering those emissions. If you're a mile away, you have almost none. So there is a big difference between exposure and emissions.
I understand that, but just again to clarify, what we try to limit as a state is, I mean, and most states throughout the country, is the harmful emissions, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Also in your report, I'm on 1 carrying over to 2 now. There's 2 statements that I'm trying to reconcile. The first one is, and I'm going to quote, "The warehouse traffic will be intermittent, not continuous, and traffic emissions tend to dissipate quickly." And then the second statement is just below that, again quoting, "Unlike traffic itself, tailpipe emissions do not remain within the white lines. Likewise, emissions from nearby high-traffic roadways drift into the Weston Road area." So what I'm trying to understand is which is it? Do emissions dissipate quickly enough that emissions from truck and traffic will not be an issue for nearby residents? Or should they be concerned about nearby high-traffic roadways?
I would say both. They do dissipate rather quickly. They do not stay in one area. You should be concerned about nearby highways. I think we all are. Well, we live in New Jersey. It's one of the factors here. But the particular tailpipe emissions that we're talking about for this project will dissipate rather quickly. They don't stay right on that roadway. So that's the idea, that the idea of a plug of tailpipe emissions staying together and reaching some vector doesn't happen. They do dissipate, just as a water spill would. It doesn't just flow down a culvert.
Right. But these are the same source of tailpipe emissions that we're talking about in both those statements.
Yeah, no, I do believe that, I mean, those highways, the emissions do drift here.
Sure.
But it's, again, cumulative. It wouldn't be just one car on 206, you receive its emissions in full a couple miles away.
All right, so another thing that we talked about, or that you talked about briefly, I believe in response to a question from the board, was the prevailing west to east winds in this area. You recall that testimony?
Right.
Do you have a source for that prevailing wind direction?
We can get that data, but it's kind of common knowledge. I mean,
Well, help me to understand then, what exactly, I know what the words prevailing and wind mean.
Right.
But in this context, explain to me what a prevailing wind is.
it would just be, well, the winds tend to move from west to east. And that would let you know where the likely, if there is any impacts, where they may affect, and to the east of this project, as I understood it, was the airport and the golf course, I believe, right? So that, there was more just who would most likely be impacted by any trace emissions that would come from the site.
Okay, and one of the high-traffic roadways you cite is I-287, which I believe sits northeast of Weston Road, is that right? So those prevailing west to east winds would probably carry those emissions away from this site, correct?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and when you have a prevailing wind, does the wind ever blow in another direction?
Yes.
Is there a percentage that makes it prevailing? Like, how often are we going to see winds blowing the other way at this site?
We can get that data.
Do you have an estimate based on your expertise?
Not of this area, no.
I'm not going to belabor the point, but is it more or less than 10% of the time?
I can't comment on it. I don't know.
50%?
It wouldn't be, well, then it wouldn't be prevailing.
49%?
No, it'll be, prevailing winds are west to east.
Okay. All right, with regards to the traffic information that you cite, I believe you say a normal day is 1 or 2 inbound delivery trucks, 3 outbound, peak season is 5 to 7 inbound with 8 to 10 outbound. Where did you get this information from?
Those were the first estimates we received from the property. I had seen some testimony, some other models, ITE models, and of 40 truck trips per day. But again, that data would be directly proportional to what I have here. My data is based on 17. If it's 40, you can roughly double my numbers, and they're still well below any impactful amount.
I understand that. What I'm trying to understand, though, is you testified earlier that you didn't review the Dolan report, Dean report, apologize. So where are we getting these numbers from for your purposes?
From the attorneys, who I assume receive them from the property.
Okay, and as the expert writing the report, you didn't feel necessary to verify that information by reading the report yourself?
No, I will accept your report on the report. If the Dean report has 40 truck trips per day, we can easily revise these numbers, and they're still negligible.
I don't even get that deference from my wife. All right, and last thing on the traffic for now, you talk about a peak season. When and how long is that, and how is that determined?
That was the maximum number we received back in, I think the project started in March or April. They said around the holidays. So I would assume that would be, a Christmas time or whatever peak season is in the management's mind. That's when the truck traffic would basically double or almost triple.
So that was based on your discussions with the
With them,
management?
correct.
And the applicant, okay. All right, you talked about the US EPA Moves 3 software. You recall that testimony?
Yes.
All right. You explained that a little bit. I appreciate that. What is the Moves 3 software most useful for?
This is from the EPA site. EPA's Motor Vehicle Emission Simulator, MOVES, is a state-of-the-science emission modeling system that estimates emissions from mobile sources at the national, county, and project level for criteria air pollutants, greenhouse gases, and air toxics. EPA describes their program better than I could.
Just for the record, can you just tell us where you were reading from? Is that a website printout?
It is I don't have the exact website, but it's EPA.gov.
Okay.
And if you search Moves 3 or the new program Moves 4, which just came out a month ago, it'll be there.
Thank you. What are some of the limitations of the Moves 3 software?
It's incredibly easy to use. Really, in this case in particular, it can be expanded to modeling much larger projects. But in the case at a project level, it's really just the number of vehicles, the year of the vehicles, in this case, it was diesel tractor trailers. But they do have quite an inventory of different vehicle types, right? And the latest update was because of electric vehicles and dual fuel. So, you really just, it's drop-down menus, input vehicle types and distance traveled. And they've studied they've done testing of all the vehicles to know the typical tailpipe emissions of that type of fleet.
Okay, I appreciate that, but I don't think you quite answered the question that I asked. I'm going to ask it again. What are some of the limitations of the software? What can it do?
What can it do? In this case, it was ideal. I mean, it was very simple to plug in diesel trucks, 5 miles. I believe that was the only parameters in this case, or in trips per day. So it's very simple. So in this case, there was no limiting factors.
So is it your testimony then that Move 3 is a perfect software?
No.
So why not?
Nothing's perfect.
Why not?
Well, the variables you'd have to put into a computer program to make it perfect are infinite. I mean, you would have to know every possible real-life factor to make a program perfect. So any program is based on some type of assumptions and estimates.
Okay, and it sounds like, I mean, I understand it's EPA software, it's not your software. But it sounds like maybe you're not aware of what those assumptions are within this software. Is that correct?
Well, no, I didn't develop it, right.
Okay. And I believe you testified there are user inputs needed to get results.
Correct.
And you explained it a little bit. Can you explain a little more what the varieties of those inputs are?
Among emission factor inputs are gasoline engine, diesel engine. We have light-duty vehicles, light-duty trucks, heavy-duty vehicles, motorcycles. Under diesel, we have light-duty vehicles, light-duty trucks, heavy-duty vehicles. There's other spreadsheets that have construction vehicles, loaders, backhoes, screeners. It really goes into depth of the parameters you need to. In this case, it was just diesel trucks. I used heavy-duty diesel trucks.
Okay, and does Move 3 produce its results in pounds per day? Is that what comes out?
No, grams per mile.
Grams per mile.
Right.
So you did the conversion then?
Correct.
Okay. Why was that necessary?
I didn't want to report it in grams per day because I don't think pounds per day is a number everyone can grasp.
Is there a relevant standard expressed in grams per day that you can articulate?
For these pollutants, no.
Okay.
I mean, there could be. I would have to check the regulations, but I don't. New Jersey tends to use pounds and tons.
Okay. Have you taken the Moves 3 Introduction and Overview webinar?
No.
Have you taken the Information and Experience Moves Modelers webinar?
No.
Have you taken the hands-on training course?
No.
The project level training for quantitative PM hotspot analysis?
No.
Have you taken any training on the Moves 3 software whatsoever?
No. If you saw it, you understand how incredibly user-friendly it is.
All right, just a few more questions about your report. So you talk about on page 3 that essentially an explosion of truck traffic is incredibly unlikely in Hillsborough because it's not an area where these types of facilities tend to be located. Is that correct?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, I'm assuming, well, I'm not going to assume anything. Are you familiar with DEP's recently promulgated environmental justice rules?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Do you understand the purpose of those rules to be to push for polluting facilities to no longer be located in the term used in the rule is overburdened communities, which is essentially low-income minority communities that they historically have been located in? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So wouldn't the reverse possibly be true then? Isn't it reasonable to expect that perhaps there may be an explosion of such facilities in towns like Hillsborough?
I find it unlikely because in a town like Hillsborough, you have community input. This is why we're here. The other communities tend not to react and force.
Is not a purpose of the environmental justice rule to encourage that very input in those overburdened communities?
It's to discourage polluting, concentrating polluting industries in overburdened communities. It is not to push it elsewhere, and that's the tricky part of the EJ dilemma.
But stepping back for 1 second, wouldn't you agree that those rules, the way they discourage more facilities in urban communities, is by encouraging community input?
Yes.
Okay.
They do.
And wouldn't you agree that such facilities have to go somewhere?
Most likely.
All right. You talk about on page 3 the standard operating procedures implemented via facility, including a no idling policy, have a great influence to lessen potential air quality impacts. Have you seen any such standard operating procedure for this facility?
I have not. It was just a suggestion among many potential standard operating procedures, as we discussed with noise.
And to confirm, you're, of course, unable to speak for the applicant to agree to
Correct.
such a condition. Are there any other steps that may be taken as part of the standard operating procedure to have such an influence?
In this case, at such a low traffic amount, there's really not too many. It's really just limiting those on-site emissions.
And your last section before your conclusion, before your summary, called vehicle information, help me to understand the relevance of this section here.
It's just to point out that vehicles have become, since the 70s, far more efficient, less polluting, and conversions to electric fleets would almost eliminate any air quality impacts. And that's obviously the way things are moving.
So what you're talking about is regulatory initiatives that are proposed looking forward to 2035 and 2050 respectively?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Is it your testimony that this board should rely on such forward-looking initiatives in approving this application?
No, I wouldn't rely on it.
Okay.
But there are already grants and programs in place now toward that goal. I would hope the board would use any influence it has to make sure those programs do not get eliminated. I would like to see the state move forward.
I don't have any questions right now. Thank you.
Any additional comments from the board before we go to the public?
I'll just have one on the trucks. Obviously, where most of the trucks now that are diesel are Tier 4, I believe, right? Emission standards, with the regens and all that kind of stuff. From an emission standpoint, how much cleaner is that truck than, let's say, a truck that is 5 years older?
Oh, 5
Or
years?
10?
It's better, but not, I wouldn't call it significant. For certain pollutants, they've done a great job. The particulate emissions they've eliminated that's been significant. I'm waiting for the next generation. The next generation of vehicles, I could see a quantum leap in reductions. But the Tier 4s, every tier helped as it went along. So the Tier 4 engines are great, but not significant in the criteria pollutants.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bodnar, correct me if I'm wrong, you just stated that there are ways to limit the amount of particulates that come off the site, is that correct?
I'm not sure. Where did we?
How does one limit the amount of pollution that's coming from the site?
Well, by limiting, you limit your emissions on site.
Right.
You know-
How do you limit them?
Oh, among things would be like a no idling policy, but it is directly correlated to truck traffic, the number of miles driven per truck.
That includes truck traffic onto the site, coming off the site, and on the site itself during operation, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Can you look at page 2 of your report? And maybe, I apologize, I've been trying to follow, but I'm still not totally sure how we get to the numbers. In your table, it says normal total emissions, 5 trucks per day. Peak total emissions, 17 trucks per day. Is that correct?
Correct.
How did you come to those numbers?
Those numbers were provided to me months ago from the attorneys and/or the managers of the project.
How do you define 5 trucks a day? That literally, I'm trying to understand what 5 trucks a day equates to. Since I am not an engineer, I only play one at these kind of things.
The numbers I was given to do the report were a normal day consisting of 1 or 2 inbound delivery trucks in the morning, 3 outbound deliveries in the afternoon.
That equals 5.
That's 5.
So over some period of time unknown, only 1 truck is going to enter the site, maybe 2, over whatever period of time this is, and only 3 are going to come out off the site during whatever hours of operation the applicant is going to have. Is that correct?
That was the information I was given, yes.
Did they indicate to you the hours of operation?
No, it didn't factor in.
Did they indicate to you the days of operation?
No, just per day.
They indicate what kind of operation was going to be on the site?
As in loading and unloading trucks?
No, as in what is going to go on in the facility that's going to require the loading and unloading of trucks and trucks coming on and off the site?
No, that was not factored into it, just the truck traffic itself.
And I know you've asked this and before, Mr. Ogrodnik hasn't had a chance to say this all night, so I'm going to give him the chance. It's your testimony you did not review the Dolan and Dean report, correct?
Correct. I reviewed a few specific portions, but I didn't need to review the whole report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we are still open to the public, so anyone?
Mr. Chairman, can I
sorry,
ask a
Mr.
follow-up
Mayor.
question
Yeah,
to
please do.
Mr. Bernstein?
Yep.
If I could clarify, I'm also on page 2, the table where you show in the 4th column the pounds per pollutant for 5 miles. And then I follow your math, you're multiplying it by 5, or you're multiplying it by 17 to get the pounds per day. If I remember from the traffic engineer, when they talk about truck trips, I think that incurs a trip is an in and an out. And if I do the math here, it looks like you're multiplying to get to 17, you're just multiplying 17. Wouldn't I really need to double that then?
Well, the information I was given, again, was that it would be 1 or 2 inbounds, 3 outbound in the afternoon. So that's where the 5 truck trips came. It's figuring inbound and outbound is 5. And the peak would be 17, which I believe during peak season, inbound deliveries expected to be 5 to 7, with 8 to 10 outbound deliveries. So that's where the 17 came from.
Yeah, I guess.
So I am considering in and out, but again, it's negligible.
So there's an odd number. So the truck's back, and either there's a truck left on site or something. And I know your report's you're not a traffic engineer, but I think from traffic engineers, a trip means an in and an out movement. So if we were going to use 17 trucks per day, that would really be 34 movements, and I think you would have to double these numbers.
If it's a terminology issue, then I could certainly change that. But from the data I was given, it would be 5 to 7 coming in and 8 to 10 going out. Now, if it's the same truck or, it doesn't really matter. It's 5 or 6 coming in, 7 to 8 going out. Or 8 to 10 going
These are
out.
total one-way trips, essentially.
Yes,
you're
that's a good way to
calculating.
put it, yes.
Okay, I just want to clarify the column. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. So, public, anyone that would like to ask this witness questions on his testimony, please come up. And again, reminder, name and address, and your affiliation, if any, to the objector.
Brian Tarantino, Fairfield Lane, not affiliated with the objector. Mr. Bodner. I understand that you produced a report that calculated the pounds of emissions that will result from truck trips.
Correct.
You also, in your report, you talk about exposure is a function of emissions and dispersal. Isn't that right?
That's a reasonable way to put it, yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so, is it true that EPA establishes ambient concentrations that would have a health effect on a person that would matter, when it comes to emissions?
There are overall air standards, yes.
So air standards would be concentrations like that would be in a breathing zone. Is that right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And I didn't see it in your report. Did you do that modeling where you calculated the exposure that a nearby resident would have from these truck emissions?
I did not, because the emission rates were so low, it didn't warrant it.
So how high would they have to be to warrant a model where you estimate the exposure of a nearby resident?
Well, one example I gave was the 3.5 pounds per hour is a magic number for DEP, and that's 3.5 pounds per hour as opposed to, less than a pound per day of emissions we're calculating would be from the proposed warehouse.
So your professional opinion is that if we got to the level of
3.5 pounds per hour of solvents, of alcohols, if that's emitted, DEP requires control. So just as a comparison.
Okay, so does that apply to any pollutant?
It doesn't. That just happens to be a very common one in the state of New Jersey.
Okay, so what about truck emissions? What's the worst part of truck emissions?
Probably the CO, carbon monoxide.
And how about the nitrogen oxides?
NOx too, yes.
Okay, and NOx, are you familiar with the health impacts of NOx?
Yes. Yeah.
And what are the impacts?
Well, I think we lay out a few in here, actually. Asthma is the leading, concern for.
Okay, so asthma is a potential hazard that a nearby resident might be exposed to.
Not at these levels.
Okay. Did you take into consideration the age of the residents? Would an older population be more sensitive to something like NOx emissions?
Yes, but at these levels, it's compared to the background ambient. If we want to do some ambient air quality sampling, I think it would be helpful to understand the level of these emissions.
So you're saying it would be necessary in order to come to the conclusion that this warehouse is not going to have an impact, it would be necessary to do some ambient air calculations. Is that what you're saying?
Objection. Not necessary, yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that would be nice to have? Like, I'm not sure I understand your statement. Is it nice to have? Is it essential to have? Why would we do this ambient air monitoring?
Well, I'm suggesting that there's probably nearby ambient air monitoring stations. There are many in New Jersey. I can find out the nearest monitoring station and get that data. It's publicly available data.
My question was, you said it would be good, I believe, and I could be,
Okay, no,
I might have misheard you. I think you said it would be good to have ambient air monitoring. Do you mean that in order to substantiate your report, it would be necessary to have that, or is it just a bonus to have that?
I would say it would put these numbers in perspective. If I can get the data from the existing monitoring stations, you would see these numbers are negligible. These, without some knowledge of the background data, these numbers are somewhat meaningless, even though they're obviously small, but you don't know what small means unless you know what ambient air quality is.
Okay, so you're saying the data in your report, the conclusions you came to, the totals that you came to are somewhat meaningless when it comes to health impacts?
No, not.
I thought that's what I just heard.
They're meaningless unless you if you don't have the background information. I know they're not I know these numbers are really, really small, but I do have the background knowledge. Now, I can give you my expert opinion, but also I can also get DEP's monitoring station data and they'll, like I said, it's publicly available. We can get some background New Jersey emissions data.
Okay. In order to evaluate the impact of the air emissions from this facility, would it be necessary to look at more sources than just trucks?
For this project, you mean, or I missed the beginning of that?
I'll say it again.
Right.
So in order to understand the impact of this proposed warehouse on the health, the air emissions, the impact of air emissions on the health of neighbors, would it be necessary to look at more sources than just trucks?
In this case, I think the mobile emissions would be by far the largest contributor.
And that's based on what?
Well, it's a warehouse. There's no production going on inside. If there is production or if it converts to a bakery or you name it, a wastewater treatment plant, then sure, there's stationary sources to consider.
Okay, what about, and what is the fuel source that this building will be used for heat?
It wasn't considered.
It wasn't considered. So it's possible that it could be number 2 fuel oil, for instance.
I don't think you could permit a fuel oil or a diesel boiler in New Jersey these days. I haven't seen one in,
Okay.
I don't know how long, I mean, but.
It's possible, though.
Objection,
Yeah.
asks a hypothetical.
So is it possible that, when you if you had modeled the dispersal of pollutants, is it possible that they would not follow the prevailing winds, but that there might be like a funneling effect of the pollutants, like down Weston Road, for instance? Is that possible?
At these levels of emissions, it's highly unlikely there's any effects. I mean, a modeling program would have to be so, what's the word? So you have to go to minute levels to track this small an emission rate for any distance. Can a wind spin around and blow a little microburst a different direction? Sure, but
I guess I'm struggling. So have you provided in your report what are the nitrogen oxide exposure level that is okay and what level is unhealthy? Have you provided that?
I do not have that in the report, no.
All right, so are you asking us to kind of just believe that these numbers are so low, but you didn't provide us with the, so I'm sorry, let me ask a question.
Let the people that he's testifying to, Mr. Tarantino, and if I remember it, is the board, not the public, not you. So if the question is, are you advising the board? Go from there with your question.
Okay. I kind of lost it. So let's see. Are you advising the board that these emission rates are so low without providing the concentrations that would be dangerous?
In this report, I was only asked to provide data on the increased, proposed increase in emissions. That background data we can supply so you have a relative number to compare to.
I want to talk about the objector's attorney took most of my questions, so I'll keep this pretty short. Are you familiar with the applicant, Mr. Arif?
Familiar as in?
You want to put a context?
I
on
will,
it?
sorry. So Mr. Arif testified. I'm trying to ask questions in the right format. I'm not that good at it, I guess. So Mr. Arif testified back in May, I believe, on the usage, on the truck trips that he was expecting in his facility. Are you familiar with that testimony?
I've seen several testimonies. The May one, I believe it was 30, was that the one where it came up to 37 or 39 truck trips? It was 19 times 2, or, I don't know, there was different testimony about different truck trips.
Okay. And yes, so he testified, so you are familiar with that, with his testimony?
Yes.
And yet
that's
your
the one.
report leaves it at 17.
Well, my report predated his testimony.
Okay.
That testimony seemed like it was, I wasn't here for it, but it seemed like it was produced during the questioning. They decided to double the traffic. I think it was a terminology issue, perhaps.
Mr.
Because, but I don't know.
Before Mr.
I wasn't here for that.
Before Mr. Tarantino goes on, I can't pass up this opportunity. Mr. Bodner, you amended your report, did you not?
I amended it. Yeah, I mean, I sent an amendment recently noting that I reviewed some of the transcripts and the relevant portions, and there were no changes to make to the report.
That's what I recall in his email, that he just said that he wasn't making any changes.
Right, so
Right.
my question is, when you amended the report, you were aware, were you not, of the various testimony from various people with various different discussions of traffic, were you not?
Yes, I saw the testimony. The numbers seem to bounce around a bit as far as the testimony I saw. And also different models, the ITE model, which I'm not familiar with because that's a traffic report. So as far as I know, I stuck with my numbers because it was a finished report. And any increase in emissions or truck traffic is proportional to what I calculated for 17. If trucks are now 38 trips, which I don't have any knowledge of for sure, it's simply double these low emission rates.
Would it be safe to say that you're really not sure what the truck traffic is on and off this site?
I'm going to object as to form. He's
Okay,
not a traffic
All
engineer.
right, well, what I'm going to ask then is, who was your source for that truck traffic? Or
This-
what was your source for your report?
The attorneys,
Why would you rely on the attorney and not the applicant themselves or the operations expert that would tell you? The
well-
attorney's not an operations expert.
Right,
No
well-
offense, Mr. Hrynick, but.
it was email exchanges, including, I believe everybody was involved on those, or? I
mean,
would have
you need
to look back to January to see the email exchanges.
Okay, but you haven't had any conversations with anyone since January then?
No, we've traded emails and such, but.
And none of those have prompted you to perhaps update your numbers or your report?
I didn't see anything significant, no. The increased truck traffic is simply taking the same, it's the same correlation from
Right. But
trucks.
you just said it would, maybe you need to double the numbers now based on the May testimony, so.
If
it
that terminology of truck trips change, yes.
It might
sure.
behoove you to maybe follow up with
Sure.
the
okay.
applicant to try to lock down what the number is.
Would you consider, if you were going to revise your report, would you consider also taking into consideration other sources of emissions that are being produced by this facility, such as truck idling, particulates from braking, dust from movement of materials on the outside loading dock, those kinds of things?
Sure, I have,
And car emissions?
I have them all in the notes. Yes, I agree with you.
Okay.
Remember, car emissions don't count. They can't put them in.
Well, car emissions are going to add to the exposure that someone sitting on their front porch is going to have. So
That would be the existing condition, I think he could find out for that. But they can't measure the car, as according to what his testimony was, doesn't count. Just
As
the
with the
trucks.
noise, yeah, off.
Well, but I think that was more just from a DEP enforcement, but I think we can still get information, because I think
We
you
get an
just
idea.
testified that your software would calculate motorcycles, so I'm sure passenger vehicles are within
Yes,
that.
it can.
So.
One last question. So when this software calculates the emissions per mile, is that the truck traveling at a certain speed? Does it take into consideration the excess emissions for when a truck is starting up?
I believe the software factors in a wide range of driving conditions. It has to at some point make an estimate. So its estimates built in starting, stopping, it's not all 55 miles an hour on the highway. They factor in stop and go.
Okay, and that's most of what's going to be here, right? Most
Correct.
of it is going to be trucks stopping, turning onto Western Road, or getting ready to turn into the facility.
Correct. And even if it contributes more than is calculated here, I want to emphasize what a low amount of emissions this represents. And I will provide the board with background air quality data, so there is a comparison. And I
So-
understand the quandary that, well, what does that mean? So if you have the background data, you'll be able to see what a negligible addition it is.
But you would still be, are you also going to do the modeling that says the emissions from this location is going to be, create an exposure
No.
of this concentration?
No, we're not.
Yeah,
And we're not going to
necessary.
present Mr. Bodnar for any more testimony. We will present a report to address all the concerns for informational purposes, but he will not be presented as a witness again.
That wasn't my question. I was just asking are you going to, since exposure is what really matters, are you going to be doing any
No.
exposure modeling?
No, there's no, it is a negligible amount. that
At 17,
there
it's
is.
negligible, right? 17 trucks.
It's well below negligible, yes. So at 38, it would still be negligible, yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public?
Lane Welsh, Orchard Drive, I'm not affiliated with anyone. Mr. Bodnar, have you been out to the site by any chance?
I have not.
Are you aware that directly across from what's going to be the entrance to the facility is a community center for the neighborhood across the street?
To the west.
Directly
Right.
across the street, I don't know directions, I'm sorry.
To the north.
There's a
Is there-
community center right there with outdoor facilities where they play shuffleboard and other things, and they gather together, I would imagine, in the afternoons and whatnot. Do you think there's going to be, for people who are gathering there on a regular basis, will there be exposure to those folks with the traffic, whether it be the truck traffic coming in and out, or the shift change from the vehicles of the employees?
The truck traffic is what I calculated, did the report on. And the emission calculations show a near zero increase in emissions due to it. It doesn't account for background air quality currently, because that's what's, that's
It's
what's here.
already there.
Right. The increase by any proposed truck traffic is negligible.
So if you were, the community center is literally on the roadway. It's not very far off the roadway. So for a truck leaving the facility that's on the right side of the road, driving north or west or whatever direction towards 206, the community center is right there. The outside facilities are right there within probably 20 feet of the roadway. Would there be exposure to those people sitting there enjoying their neighbors and having a drink or socializing? Would there be exposure to them each time that truck goes by with the emissions coming off the stack?
There's exposure all day long. I mean, is car traffic, truck traffic already on the road.
We're talking
These
increase.
few, right, these few only have a minor increase in pounds. It's less than a pound per day of each pollutant. I'm trying to
Would
to
you-
come up with a way to,
Yeah, I
give
understand
you
you're
a
saying
relative of what a
overall
pound per
it's
day is.
negligible.
But
Would you want to be sitting there within 15 feet of the roadway, socializing with your neighbors as a truck drives by with the emissions coming off the stack on the right side of the road right next to you?
that depends on the neighbor. But
Fair enough. Okay. I have, just for my own edification, can you tell me, from an emissions point of view, diesel versus gasoline? What's the difference?
Actually, here's a spreadsheet of a zillion emission factors. You can dig in all you want.
I don't have my glasses.
But-
I can't look at it and read it. I
It's-
mean, diesel is worse than gasoline.
Yes, but not as significant as you think. I'm trying to get a factor here. Exhaust, boy, I can't read it
Maybe the
either.
particulates are worse in a diesel. I mean, we all see the diesel smoke coming out of the
Yeah, no,
stacks.
according to
There's
this
a
one.
perception there.
Right, the diesel exhaust, 0.106 grams per mile, and gasoline car, 0.004. So it's higher, but it's still, 0.1 grams per mile. I mean, it's air quality impacts by vehicles are not like they were, as we talked about the Tier 4 engines. I mean, there's been remarkable progress, and it's getting better. So it's not, that's why these numbers are as low as they are.
Gotcha. We're not measuring, the state doesn't require information about personal vehicles, the employees and stuff like that, but just looking at an impact to that community that's sitting there socializing on the side of the road, literally within about 15 feet of the roadway, shift change, trucks going by, that's an increase that is not there right now, that the impact from this new facility will put on that community. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I'm asked to calculate those emissions, I will. It wasn't part of this project. This was totally just about the truck traffic.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when the next member comes up, I think in your notes, it's going to include getting that baseline, as far as what's considered, what led to your conclusion statement.
I agree.
The supporting evidence as to why, we feel it's it's negligible.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, thank you.
Grant Colmer, Taylor Avenue, not a part of, not affiliated with any objectors. Mr. Bogdan, when I look at air quality, or if I hear on the news or whatever else, particularly when we had the orange, I don't even, you know what I mean, right? The reporting factor was parts per million, right? How does can you help me understand what you're reporting out in your report in terms of parts per million, in terms of air quality? Does it make sense?
It does make sense. It wasn't part of this report. That conversion can be done. Parts per million can be tricky because it's a
concentration, I would say,
it's a
isn't it?
concentration as opposed to a mass emission. So we were looking for how much total, parts per million is more of an instantaneous measurement. Almost as we talked about decibels. It's right now, here's your concentration. Pounds is a mass, so it's how much has accumulated during the day. That was the concern of this report. Any spike ppm issues weren't considered because that wasn't part of the report.
Would it be your testimony that it would be negligible for this property to increase the parts per million or parts per billion?
Right, to increase any instantaneous ppm measurement, you'd certainly need more mass emissions and.
How much more?
That would take a calculation.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one more question for the witness. Who regulates emissions? In the state of New Jersey, who regulates the emissions?
For stationary sources, it's the Bureau of Stationary Sources, BOSS, NJDEP.
Okay, and who regulates emissions federally?
The EPA, US EPA.
There's no other jurisdictional.
No, the DEP does give county agencies, often gives them authority to go out and inspect sites, odor complaints, air quality issues. So they're often given the designated authority to do inspections locally.
Thank you.
I don't think so. Anyone else? Board, one more shot? Okay. And looking at the time, we're past the time to start new testimony. So we need to talk about, I guess, an extension or a continuation, including the time of decision. Yes, Mr. Coyce, we're looking at you. You hold the calendar.
It's up to you. It's the only open one that we can adjust.
Mr. Chairman, could we take a few minutes just to talk about that, please?
Sure. How much? Need
About 5
10?
minutes.
All right, we'll reconvene at 10. Because we started a little late tonight, so.
Mr. Coyce, if you're having conversations relative to scheduling as to this application, I would suggest you include counsel for the objectors.
Right now? We will, yes.
Are we broken for 10 minutes? Can we discuss?
Okay.
Okay, we're back in session. Okay. So, Mr. Coyce, what have you negotiated?
Okay, we have February 1st, 2024.
Okay.
That soon?
And the applicant has agreed to a time of decision of February 15th, 2024.
So I just got a quick question.
A time of decision.
Right.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
A TOD, time of decision, it's an extension.
For the,
By the way, the
Object-
February 1st date is still tentative pending the approval of the board's calendar, which we are hoping will come at the next meeting.
right. Will you be having witnesses to present at some point?
Yes, we will.
So do we think February 15th is a legitimate, that we're going to be doing another time of decision extension if they
It's
get-
probably going to be extended again, because as I understand the procedure,
They,
objectors case in chief, cross
right,
of the professionals, closing.
right.
Well, no. Not totally, and I have set forth this to everybody before. Mr. Ogrodnik needs to finish with his witnesses, which I assume at the moment is one more witness,
Mr. Ford,
Mr. Ford.
Right.
Then it's objectors' witnesses, and it is my understanding, and Mr. Sinkovich, et cetera, can advise, but I believe the magic number is 5.
Yeah, we have 2 experts and 3
Right.
lay witnesses.
Mr. Ogrodnik has asked whether or not he can then examine Mr. Coyce and Mr. Mayu. That would occur after the objector's case in chief is finished. Once everybody has cross-examined everybody within an inch of their lives, it's then the public's comments at the end, then objector's counsel, then applicant's counsel close.
Right. But just so that the public knows, can it be anyone from the public or only if they're not
Only
affiliated?
those members of the public not
Affiliated,
the same
represented. Yep.
ground rules of.
No, I just want to get that clarified. I just
Mr.
don't
Ash and
want
Mr.
to-
Sinkovich have taken the mic away from anyone they are currently representing.
Okay.
Unless the one's given direct testimony.
Other than the people who are going to testify and will be cross-examined, no member of the public who is represented by by objectors may speak on the overall application at the time in which the board will hear such comments.
And one caveat, we still could potentially reintroduce Michael Ford in rebuttal, or anyone.
Or anyone else for that matter, as could they, and as I said, I would go back to the chairman's comments. February 15th, we all know is not really realistic, so
Well,
let's,
unfortunately, my clients aren't here today,
that's
so.
fine.
Yeah.
Everybody
fine.
understands that.
Okay. So now it's a
It is a
motion.
motion, Mr. Chairman, to, subject to confirmation of the board's 2024 calendar, that the matter will be heard, and we will have to send everybody letters to that effect once the board confirms it, that the matter is carried without further notice to Thursday, February 1st, 2024 at 7 p.m., or soon thereafter as the matter may be heard, and the time of decision has been extended to February 15th, 2024.
Thank you. So may I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, and we have a second by the committeeman. Roll call, please.
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Scobo?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Radowitz?
Yes.
Committeeman Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Mayor LaPani?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes, and,
Mr. Chairman, I do have one more item before the board adjourns.
okay,
I am asking the board to approve a motion to conduct an executive session at the November 2nd, 2023 board meeting sometime during the board hours, yet to be determined, regarding pending and anticipated litigation, of which there are 4 lawsuits at the moment, as well as attorney-client privilege. And I need such approval so that Mr. Coyce's office can notice same. He's been given the language, et cetera.
okay. Do we need to do a roll or just an affirmation?
I need a motion to authorize an executive session, because for whatever reasons, and I would ask the board to consider this in next year's calendar, that we do not allow for the calling of executive session at any meeting. It requires a separate determination, a separate advertisement.
Okay,
So moved.
Second.
okay, roll call, please. Sorry? Oh, the mayor made the motion, Mr. Scobo second.
Scobo.
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Scobo?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Radowitz?
Yes.
Committeeman Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Mayor LaPani?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
okay, and should we deal with the cancellation of the business meeting, or?
Yep.
Okay. May I have a motion to cancel the October 26, 2023 business meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Does anyone object?
Roll call, please.
Mr. Peason?
Yes.
Mr. Scobo?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Radowitz?
Yes.
Committeeman Ciccarelli?
Yes.
Mayor LaPani?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes. May I have a motion for adjournment, please?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. See everyone November 2nd. Good night.